I added way too much sodium silicate to 2 big buckets of glaze as it was too thick and water was not helping the issue. Can I save these buckets? I can't stress enough. I added a lot of sodium silicate, like a quarter to half a cup for a 5,000 gram batch of wet glaze. Yikes. So in my experience, I did this on purpose because I was experimenting. So I didn't ruin a glaze by accident. I ruined a glaze on purpose. So I was testing the effects of different flocculant or deflocculants. So sodium silicate is a deflocculant, also known as a dispersant. What it does is it reduces the viscosity of your glaze without adding extra water. And so sometimes we have glazes that are very thick, even though, so say we measure specific gravity, we get it to 1.5, the glaze is still very thick in the bucket. If we keep adding more and more water, that can lead to issues with crawling because more water equals more shrinkage during the glaze drying process. So our glaze dries, our glazes, most glazes have a percentage of clay in them to keep them suspended in the bucket. Clay shrinks when it dries, therefore our glazes shrink when they dry. The more clay you have in your glaze, the more your glaze is going to shrink while it dries on your pots. And the more water you have in your glaze, the more the glaze will shrink. So if you can think about clay bodies, if you have a liquid slip that you use for attaching, that shrinks way more than clay that's already leather hard. So leather hard clay shrinks less because it has already shrunk, and the shrinkage happens because the water evaporates and the particles move closer together. And so if you keep adding water to a glaze that's not thinning down, that's usually because it's in a flocculated state, which it was a good idea to deflocculate this glaze, anonymous attendee. But sodium silicate is one of those deflocculants where you can easily overdo it. And even if you add just a little bit too much, so when you deflocculate a glaze, you add a little bit of your deflocculant, high-speed mix, and then the viscosity should go down. So your glaze should visibly thin down in the bucket. So it's like thick, moving very slowly as you're mixing, and then you deflocculate, and then all of a sudden it's like moving really nicely, fluidly, more like water. And when you over deflocculate your glaze, it reaches a point of like absolute deflocculation or something. I just made that up, but it becomes completely deflocculated, and if you add more deflocculant, then it becomes over deflocculated, and the reverse happens. It thickens up again, it turns into a sludge, and there's no going back. So I did try this. There's a video on YouTube of me like in awe because I'd never experienced this before, where I'm like, what is happening here? Like, why is my glaze so thick? And so then I learned about, over deflocculating. And so I learned that sodium silicate, you have to actually add a very small amount at a time, high speed mix, let it sit for a bit. Like, you have to allow it to kind of take effect before you add any more. Because once it thickens up, so I tried everything. Like, I tried adding a bunch of water, like mixing it up with water and then pouring the water off the top to see if that could remove some of the deflocculant and to fix the glaze, and it wasn't able to be fixed. And so luckily for me, it was just a test and I just got rid of it. But so warning, I don't recommend sodium silicate as a deflocculant. If you can get something else like Darvan 7 is the chemical name is sodium polymethacrylate. There are other products around the world. So I live in North America. Dispex and Dolopix are 2 other deflocculants. They all start with D, which makes it easy to remember. They all work the same. Sodium is the active deflocculating ingredient, and they are more ideal than using sodium silicate as a deflocculant. So I'm sorry that you added too much sodium silicate, and so hopefully it's a good learning experience and that you won't do it again. Is there much of a difference between Darvan 7 and Darvan 811? No. So Darvan 811, I can't remember the composition. It's either sodium polyacrylate. So Darvan 7 is sodium polymethacrylate. Darvan 811 is either sodium polyacrylate, which is very similar, or it's an ammonium-based deflocculant. But in my understanding, I've never used Darvan 811, but in my understanding, they both work the same, and they're both better than sodium silicate.